I'm Beth Carroll. I'm going to be talking today to Ben Mack-Jackson. He's a Rollins student, but is a documentary filmmaker and storyteller. Some of his work will be on display at the Orlando Museum of Art. With the museum, Maureen Walsh. She's the communication and marketing manager. Thanks to both of you for being here.
Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
You know, Maureen, I'm going to bring you in first, actually. People know they can go online to omart.org to learn more about what's happening at the museum. But Ben's work is part of an exhibit called Ukraine's Greatest Generation, Courage in the Midst of Chaos. Do you want to tell us about the exhibit and how people can view it?
Yeah, so Ben's showcase here at the Museum of Art is kind of in tandem with another exhibition we have going on. It's actually the first time the museum has been able to partner with the Ginsburg Family Foundation. And we've been able to bring an exhibition called Relentless Courage, Ukraine and the World at War, to the Orlando Museum of Art. So we were approached by the Ginsburg Foundation and the Ukraine House out of Washington, D.C., where the exhibition was previously showcased, and had an opportunity to bring these impactful photographs and these stories to our museum. And then also in connection with the Ginsburg Family Foundation and Mark McMurrin, we were approached by Ben and heard of his story, where Ben traveled to Ukraine in the summer of 2022 and was able to capture photographs and stories from the war in Ukraine as well. And, you know, we were fortunate enough to be able to partner with Ben and show his photos and tell more stories of the people and the atrocities that they're experiencing over in Ukraine.
Is this something you often do at the museum, though, to kind of connect directly with the local public? Rollins is very local to the Orlando Museum of Art, or was this just a wonderful thing to happen?
So this was kind of serendipitous in the way that this came together. You know, as part of our mission here at the museum, we do make it a priority to showcase and encourage local artists from our community, but really fortunate, and as I said, serendipitous, that Ben had the connection with the Ginsburg Foundation and Mark McMurrin, and it fit so wonderfully with the Relentless Courage exhibition. It was just a great opportunity for us to make that local connection and have, you know, someone from our community be a part of this storytelling that we're doing here.
So, Ben, I do want to talk a little bit about your past and what led up to this project, because you are young and you were even younger when you started storytelling, right? To look at war. And can you tell us a little bit of the path you've taken?
Yeah, so I've always been a student of historical war and conflict for as long as I can remember. When I was 13 years old, I sat down with a World War II veteran and conducted an interview with him. He was 92 at the time. I was 13. That experience led me on now a over 7-year journey of capturing and documenting the stories of World War II veterans through the nonprofit organization that I started, World War II Veterans History Project. And, you know, as a student of historical war and conflict, I never imagined that I'd find myself in the position to document modern war firsthand, especially one in Europe. But, you know, all of that changed when Russia invaded Ukraine in February of 2022.
But I do have to ask the question. I know you've probably been asked it very naively by people my age all along, and that is, why would you start to look at war? Why did this become a passion project?
Well, at first it was, you know, a personal project to learn more about World War II. And it's, you know, over the years, it's expanded into much more. It's, you know, my life mission to ensure that these stories of World War II veterans are not forgotten by future generations. And so I've been fortunate to talk with, like I said, over 100 World War II veterans. I've documented their stories in the form of you know, documentary films and photography, traveling museum exhibitions, speaking engagements, and, you know, just to ensure that their memories live on. And so, like I said, it started as a personal project, and now it's morphed into something far greater, with the hopes of educating my generation and generations to come about just how brutal war is and why such events shouldn't be repeated.
So, in fact, is that a discovery you made? I mean, we sort of have this sterile version maybe of a war, particularly now, as like it's supposed to happen immediately and all this. When you were that 13-year-old speaking to that veteran, did something kind of click in you about what this really meant?
100%. I mean, when I was in fifth grade, there was only 2 pages about World War II in my history textbook, the largest and most devastating war known to man. I just knew there had to be more. And that's really when my journey began. But when I was 13, it kind of hit me one day that I could actually talk to those who survived the conflict instead of reading their stories in books or watching movies or documentaries. And so my curiosity is really what sparked that interest, and now that, mission to ensure that people my age and future generations have the same appreciation and understanding of just how terrible war, World War II and all war really is, and why we shouldn't repeat those events.
So let's talk about today then, or better said, when you went to Ukraine and you took photographs.
That's correct. Yes. So, with the warped interpretations of World War II and denazification at the forefront of the false justification for Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine, I felt compelled to go and, document the truth of the situation from my perspective. I first traveled to that area in March of 2022. I did humanitarian work along the border with Poland and Ukraine in March 2022 during my spring break. And I flew out there. We worked along the border just a few weeks after the invasion started, and in my free time, I would go over to where the refugees were coming across, and I would document their experiences and document that situation. And then I came back to Florida. I finished my semester at Rollins. In the meantime, planning and fundraising for a trip to Ukraine itself. And then in May of 2022, I went to Ukraine to document the war itself.
How did you, let's say, embed yourself, or did you? How did you keep yourself safe and yet have access?
Well, I spent a few weeks embedded with soldiers and civilians whose lives have been upturned by this invasion. And obviously it took a lot of planning and a lot of coordination to make that happen. And, I was 19 years old at the time, 20 now. And so this was, the biggest thing I've ever planned, the biggest thing I've ever, undertaken by myself. And so, I was fortunate to have a good group of people that I knew beforehand who were able to help me, get into Ukraine and have, drivers, translators, people who were willing to share their stories as well. And of course, a lot of it was, just, spontaneous. It came as the trip went on, new stories that I found, new places that we visited that I hadn't planned for. So a lot of it is spontaneous, but obviously, I had a pretty solid support system going into the country itself. And of course, I'm really grateful for all the people who supported me to make this happen. And in terms of safety, I mean, there's always a sense of danger, no matter where you are. I mean, some parts of Ukraine are more secure and safe than others that are further away from the conflict zone. We would go to the Kyiv region, which had been occupied previously by Russian forces. That was where we went for, rest and relaxation when we came back from the eastern part in Sumy Oblast. But, the house that I was staying in the Kyiv region, in the town of Bucha, had been occupied by Russian soldiers just weeks before. I mean, there was parts of Russian uniforms and things that they had left behind literally in the room that I was staying in. They had lived there before. So, there's always that sense of, this is where it happened, and your eyes are open to that very quickly. And I think it was eye-opening to me to witness something like that.
I have to ask you once more about your age, because surely you ran into refugees and even victims perhaps that are your age and younger. And what washed over you in those moments?
Yeah, that's something that it was definitely in the back of my head the entire time, was the age of the people who are fighting and dying in this conflict, and their experiences. There was one day that I met a man by the name of Andre, who was a tank commander. He knocked out a Russian tank in the Sumy Oblast with an RPG, and the tank commander was able to escape off that tank when he hit it with the RPG. And Andre chased the tank commander into the woods. They had a skirmish, and Andre was the one who came out alive. And so I was able to visit that location just a few months after that engagement happened. And the body of the Russian tank commander is still laying in the woods, exactly where Andre killed him. And this man was probably not much older than I was, when he was killed. And so, as a 19-year-old guy, I mean, this is the first time I've had an experience like that, experiencing that. Naturally, I've talked with World War II veterans, and they've told me stories of seeing knocked out tanks, bombed out buildings, rotting corpses. But, as someone, a 19-year-old kid living in Central Florida, there's, it's hard to make that connection. Now I've had the opportunity to witness those things with my own two eyes. And I think, this experience not only taught me a lot about the current conflict and, modern war, but it taught me a lot about historical war and conflict as well. And I think it'll make me a better documentarian, a better storyteller, and a better, historian documenting both past and future conflict.
Yeah, I want to ask you about that. I guess we could call it your artistic vision at this point in capturing that, and also the ethics. I mean, what have you learned, or what have you taken away about the most humane way that you can do what you're doing and yet still capture the moment, capture that important information, and relate it to others? And I guess I should also say, were these all still images, or were you filming as well?
Most of the work that I did was still images. I did some video as well. And in terms of the ethical, situation, it's a difficult question, and it's a question that I think all photojournalists and all people who document war and conflict, both past and present, ask themselves, all the time. And for me, I think the most important thing is that these stories are getting out there for people to see, and I think that's the most important aspect of any sort of a documentary photography or documentary work, is that, the stories are being told. Of course, there's a right and wrong way to do it. And I think that, it's important to respect the situation in Ukraine, respect the people in Ukraine. And, this was my first time documenting a war, firsthand, that's a modern war. And so this was, my first time doing it. So I learned a lot, of course, during my experience over there. But like I said, I had a support team of people and contacts both here in the US and overseas who supported me and made sure that the work I was doing was ethical and correct, and doing justice to the stories that I was capturing.
So let's talk about the exhibit and what people will see. I'm not sure, Ben, do you want to lead into this by telling us what's been put together for this particular exhibit, or would you like Maureen to do it?
Well, Maureen, you could talk a little bit about the overarching Relentless Courage exhibition, and then I can probably go into a little bit about the work that I'm doing in conjunction with that.
I think that makes sense.
Agreed.
So as I mentioned, this exhibition, Relentless Courage, came to us from the Ukraine House. It actually started as a book published by Blue Star Press of the same name, and it features myriad of photojournalists that went to Ukraine and went to the conflict zone and have captured these sensitive moments and these really challenging scenes of reality, and it's the humanity of what these residents and the Ukrainians are facing every single day. And as I mentioned, it is full of sensitive content. There are corpses in these photographs. There are families. There are elderly women who said, "I'm not leaving. This is my home." Children, huddled in basements because they're scared, because all they're hearing are bomb raids and sirens going off every day. And so, telling these stories and documenting this history, as Ben mentioned, so that we don't repeat these same mistakes. And I think it's very easy for people to escape it. I think it's easy for us as Americans, especially, to turn off the TV or turn off the radio and stop listening to these stories. And even what the news has delivered to people, that's picking and choosing. When you see these photos, it is truly the reality of what Ukrainians are facing every single day. And what Ben was able to do through his trip to Ukraine, just the way it connected to the story through Relentless Courage, it just made sense. A lot of Ben's images are similar in that, that they're not easy to look at, and it's not an easy exhibition to walk through. We've had a lot of people go through both parts, and they take a moment after and they linger in the exhibition, because it generates these strong feelings and strong emotions as you walk through it. So it just kind of it was a perfect tie to bring in Ben's work to be kind of adjacent and part of this exhibition.
And then Ben, what work have you brought in?
I was approached by the Ginsberg Foundation and Mark McMurran, asking me if I was, interested in showcasing some of my work alongside the Relentless Courage exhibition. obviously this is an incredible honor for me to be able to showcase my work alongside such talented photojournalists who've been, documenting war and conflict for decades. And so, it's honestly an honor and a privilege for me to do this. I tried to curate a selection of images. I believe there's 19 of mine that are on display at the museum that tell the story of the conflict from my perspective and the stories that I captured. And I think that, I chose a group of portraits from the soldiers that I was embedded with, and their individual stories are told through the photographs and the descriptions at the museum. The story of Andre and the tank that he knocked out is also on display. There's little individual vignettes of stories that I was able to capture. And one thing that I tried to do was these stories are not unique to the conflict in Ukraine. These stories, not obviously with the same actors, but with the same context and the same situations have been, going on for decades in different wars and conflicts. And I think it's important for people to realize that people have been, fighting and dying for these values for generations. And this is, just another extension of that. The people of Ukraine are fighting, civilians are still dying, and all Ukrainians are still enduring the hardships of wartime and being this rock for freedom and democracy for not just Europe but for the entire world. And I think it's important for people to realize that.
Yeah, I think to kind of expand on that, what Ben is saying, I think that in a way, these photos and these stories are very relatable for a lot of people. We've had veterans come through the museum and we caution them as they walk into the exhibition because we understand, as Ben said, this is not just the story of the Ukraine war. This is a story about war in general, and the atrocities that occur and the why behind it. And sometimes there's not a good why, and the innocent people who are victims of what's happening when, as I said, they're innocent and their stories are being molded, because of these actions and these things that are happening around them. And so I think, people can relate, and depending on where they're from, can see some of their own stories in these images. Ben highlights some of the soldiers that he ran into on his journey through Ukraine. As I mentioned, we have veterans that come through the exhibition, and you can tell they have moments where they relate, and it brings them back to their story in a time where they experienced something similar. So I think, being able to make those connections is really strong and valuable as well, and part of this exhibition.
The issue of relatable, Ben, I know you're taking this from a historian's perspective too, and I think it would be interesting to hear, what you think about looking at this from a historical perspective in terms of what Maureen's saying about the immediate present day impact
of the war itself, like the context.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, I mean, when this war began, the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February of 2022, it was a shock to me and to many other people within the historical community. I think that we didn't expect that this would ever happen, but now that it did, I mean, there's so many connections to World War II and to past conflicts, and I think that's part of the reason why I felt compelled to go there in the first place. I mean, I've talked with hundreds of veterans of World War II, and I realized that I still had no idea what it was like to be in a nation at war until I experienced it myself, and so relating this to World War II and making connections is something that, I'm hesitant about it sometimes because it is an entirely different conflict with an entirely different, way of making war. But some of the deep historical connections are there. I mean, when Putin first announced that this special military operation, as he said it, was beginning, he used denazification as the main reasoning, essentially to denazify the Ukrainian government, which, by the way, has a Jewish president. So the logic is not there in terms of the reasoning for why it started, but the terminology that's being used and some of the propaganda that's coming out of Russia is very similar to what we saw during World War II and in the years leading up to World War II. I mean, this is incredibly difficult to watch as someone who studies war with the hopes of preventing future conflict. It's very, very difficult to watch, and it's something that I never expected to see in my lifetime.
Being a student there at Rollins College, are you having discussions with other students? Are they asking about the photos? Are they viewing them?
100%, yeah. A whole bunch of students from Rollins came and viewed the exhibition at the opening reception, and I believe many more have attended since. And it's, for me, that's the entirety of my mission, is to reach people my age and those in the future generation. So I'm 100% talking about it all the time and ensuring that people are aware of what's going on both now in Ukraine and what's happened in the past with historical wars. I think it's critical for the survival of our country that our citizens have an understanding of this conflict and how truly brutal all conflict really is.
And Maureen, how are both exhibits being perceived now by visitors? What are you hearing?
So I think we were overwhelmed by the reception of the exhibition itself. We know that it's hard content to take in and to see, but from our opening reception and some of our preview tours that we gave, I had a conversation with one of our docents who actually is from Ukraine and was able to talk to her about her experience. And, she has family members there, and it just was overwhelming to hear her thoughts and her take on the exhibition. So, very well received. We're really proud to be able to tell these stories and to have worked with, Blue Star Press and the Ginsburg Family Foundation and Ukraine House on bringing this exhibition here. Overall, the reception has been very impressive. And we're just, like I said, we're very proud to be able to share these stories with our community here in Orlando.
Why don't you give us the details of, how long the exhibits will be on view? And again, even hours, that kind of thing, how people can learn more.
So Relentless Courage and Ben's exhibition, Ukraine's Greatest Generation, will be on view through March 26th. And the museum is open Tuesday through Sunday. Tuesday through Friday, our hours are 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. And Saturdays and Sundays, it's noon to 4 p.m. So still some time to come in and see these exhibitions and all the others that we have on view.
Ben, what's next? We were talking about how long the exhibit would run. And of course, you're doing your studies, but what's next?
That's the most common question that I get asked. This was something completely unexpected, the entire, documenting a modern war. It's something that I never expected. I'm going to continue doing the historical work that I've been doing. I'm still continuing to interview World War II veterans, produce documentary films, and educate people about that conflict. But I also think it's important for me to carry on the work of documenting the war in Ukraine. I think I've had a foundation in it now, and I'm looking forward to continuing that work in the near future.
Of the images that are on exhibit, is there one that you would say that for you is the one that just captures it, whatever you perceive it as being?
It's difficult, of course, to choose one image or one story that I think is more unique or more special than others. But I think one that really hits home with me personally is the story of Andre and the tank that he knocked out. I still remain in contact with his wife. I talk with her almost every single week and get updates on where he's being deployed and how he's doing. He's been fighting in Ukraine since the war began, defending his city. He was not a soldier before the war began. This is his introduction to being a soldier. And so he was thrust into this, not voluntarily. And so, talking with him and his wife about their experiences has been, a really, powerful experience for me. And I think that the photos I have on display from that vignette or that story are particularly powerful. And I think that, people should read that story and see those images. I think it's a powerful experience. I just think it's important for all of us to keep Ukraine and its people in our thoughts. And despite, the waning media coverage and overall discussion about it, I think it's important that people know the conflict is still ongoing and the people of Ukraine still deserve our support.
Benjamin Mack-Jackson is a Rollins student and a documentary filmmaker and storyteller. Maureen Walsh is communications and marketing manager for the Orlando Museum of Art. The exhibit is Ukraine's Greatest Generation, Courage in the Midst of Chaos.